Good morning. We will be beginning this Renaissance Executive Forum's webinar in just a few minutes at the hour. Make yourselves comfortable, and we will see you soon. Welcome. You're in the right place. This is Executive Forum's Expert Insights webinar. We'll be beginning in just a couple minutes. Make yourselves comfortable, and we'll be with you. We'll be beginning in just a moment. Thank you for your patience. Settle in. We'll be right with you. Alrighty, good morning. Welcome to Renaissance Executive Forum's Expert Insights webinar. These webinars are designed to help us fulfill our why. Our why is to help business leaders evolve personally, professionally, and business growth-wise. Because when we encounter, when we help engender conscious, integrated leaders, we see a positive, powerful, cascading impact occurring throughout the world. So what we realized is that we actually don't have much control over that. What we have control over is presenting our business leaders with that which expands awareness and allows us to see what we don't yet see, to be discerning about options, and then to take action, to align around what we know is in our best interest, what is in our best interest of our organization, our families, and the world, and act on that. And we leverage the collective consciousness the collective intelligence as we go forward with this. And that's what we're going to do today, is give ourselves a chance to kind of reframe something that I believe we view maybe as a liability, and that's stress, and how to turn that energy, if you will, into something that becomes an asset. And to do that, we're going to draw on the expertise of Jessica Schneider. Jessica, would you join us now? Let me give you just a brief introduction. So Jessica is a coach that really focuses in an integrative, holistic, purposeful, conscious way in creating enhanced leadership. She works holistically and to help leaders become influencers of building healthy cultures, organizations, and communities. And Jessica promotes innovative strategy and mindset that can challenge and create new pathways for achieving higher levels of performance for progressive change. Jessica has a wide background of, I'd say, very powerful tools that she draws on. She's certified in the Leadership Circle of 360, Intelligent Leadership, Executive Coaching, Heart Math, and currently she's enrolled with a cohort in becoming certified as a conscious capitalism advisor. Welcome, Jessica. And this is a subject that I think we all look forward to because, it's something we're encountering on a daily basis, and whether we're paying attention to it or not. So welcome.
John, thank you for that beautiful introduction, albeit somewhat intimidating when you hear it. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you today. And I would just like to express my gratitude to Rick and John, because both of you have shown such kindness and grace and generosity with your time and support in allowing me to be here today. So I thank you both. And this is my first introduction into the Renaissance Executive Forums, and just through the lens of both of you, what a beautiful space that all of you are creating. And I do believe that we can use our businesses to elevate the world and elevate humanity. But in order to do that, that really starts with this inner journey and the work within inside of ourselves. So thank you guys. And I just want to acknowledge all of you who have taken the time out of your day to be here and engage in this conversation with me. Time is our most valuable asset. And it's one of those things that when we give it away, we can't get it back. So my intent today is to give you some insights, some wisdom, and really practical tools. Some will be familiar, some will be a little bit different, that you can walk away with today, that you can implement into your daily lives, that is going to help you navigate this complex world of stress that we live in, and that rather than pulling you back in life, you can use it to launch you forward. So let's dive in. And I'm going to ask you guys to do just a short little exercise with me. And first thing I'd like you to do is just take a moment and take a breath. And send that breath not just into your chest, but all the way around your back and down into your belly. If you can, even put a little smile on your face. And think about a couple of things that you're grateful for.
Jessica, you got muted somehow.
Can you hear me now?
Gotcha.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened, the gifts of technology and webinars and maybe a little nerve. So gratitude, I invited you guys to just take a moment into, John, can you just maybe frame up for me where I got muted, because I don't know what people heard or didn't hear.
Yeah, actually, it was right after inviting them to think of a few things that they're grateful for. And then kind of, I thought you went giving us silence there for a moment.
Okay, so after that, I was asking you to maybe put a couple of those things in the chat box, if you don't mind. And gratitude is such a simple practice. And I invited you to start with that, because that simple act of putting a smile on our face, taking a deep breath, and thinking of a couple of things that we're grateful for changes our nervous system. It changes the function of what's happening in our brain and the hormones that are released. And it changes, it relaxes our nervous system and gives us an opportunity to move from a stress into a generative response. And so that is available to you at all times, 24/7, and it costs you nothing. And so this simple transformation of stress, it doesn't always have to be complex. It's about building these inner resources inside of us to be able to, on a daily basis, to be able to navigate it. So I see some of the ones, family and beautiful son this morning, wife, kids, career, time to reflect on what I'm grateful on. Thank you guys for sharing. Doesn't that just kind of energize you a little bit? And it's so simple, and it doesn't take very much time. So my intent today is to really give you some wisdom and tools that you can walk away with that will make a meaningful difference in your life around stress. And why am I so engaged in this story? This is very personal for me from a professional and a personal level. And I have taken on a lot of adventures in my life. I have ridden horses from Chile to Argentina. I have galloped across the Niger Desert. I have skied some of the most intense terrain that's in the world. And all of it has had its challenge and its stress, but none of it has been as challenging for me as the one of the brain. And this photo here was taken moments before my life changed forever. And we were at a parents versus kids pickup hockey game. And as you can see, I'm not exactly a hockey player. There I am in the hockey rink with my riding helmet on. Despite that, I was still very competitive and determined that we parents were going to beat these 11-year-old kids on the ice. And so there I am, very intense, looking down, wanting to go to goal and score, focusing so intently on the puck. And then out of nowhere, bam, I had this collision with my son. And I didn't have that visceral second to respond. And so my body didn't tense up. And what happened is my neck snapped back and forth. And there was this thunderous crack that went out of my ears. And then I landed on my knees. I never hit my head. Nobody else knew on the ice that anything was off. There wasn't any broken glass. There wasn't any blood. But I just knew in that moment something was wrong. 5 days later, I'd been to the doctor. They say, just go home. I'm lying in bed and I wanted to go to the washroom. And that simple task that I've done thousands and thousands of times before that I never even think about was complex. I didn't know how I was going to do it. It felt overwhelming. I didn't know how I was going to get there. And even that night, I went to bed And I remember having this feeling come over me that I was maybe not going to wake up the next day. But I did. 3 months later, my kids are trying to engage me. Mom had been spending most of her days in bed, and they wanted me to play Monopoly. So once again, something that I had done well at before, had been competitive at, was pretty straightforward, was complex and overwhelming. I didn't understand. I didn't know the rules. And why did they make me want to pass go? And it was this concussion that had forced me into this deep understanding and this deep relationship with stress and how it impacts you. So for me, what the concussion did is it took away my buffer. And so my analogy is like walking down a street. When you walk down a street, you've got this wide bandwidth that you can adapt, you can move, you can circle around the car. If you trip over a pothole, then you've got space and time to get yourself back up. And I no longer had that buffer, and my life became like a tightrope. So anytime a stressor came into my life, it was immediate, it was instant. It was like walking outdoors without a winter coat on a really cold winter's day. There was no protection from it. I didn't have a filter, and it would knock me off that tightrope. So I became really acutely aware of what was working for me and what wasn't working for me. And I knew, as the doctors kind of didn't have much to offer at the brain injury clinic and the concussion clinic, I had to become my own self-advocate of my healing journey. And I became this full-time experimenter. So the things that I'm bringing you today are from my own personal learning journey of what has worked for me and what hasn't worked for me and what is out there and why it matters. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm just, I have a life PhD in experimenting around how to navigate this complex world of stress. And so stress comes into our life in a number of ways. It can be environmental. So that's noise, that's light. For me, fluorescent lights and computer screens are a slow form of torture. It can be chemical. That can be what's in our food. Physical, underexertion, overexertion, pain, and emotional. But what's so fascinating about the body is it doesn't distinguish between the kind of stress. It only shows it as stress. And so I find this fascinating because if you eat 100% organic food and you think you're doing really amazing things for your body, you are. But equally, if you are living in a mindset of anger and resentment and fear and anxiety, all that organic food is doing is fueling the emotions that cause hormonal releases around fear, anger, resentment, anxiety. So we have, when we're in a stress response, we go into what's called fight, flight, or freeze. I'm sure you've heard that before. It's not a new concept. And what happens is if we're in a stress response, one of the hormones we're releasing is cortisol. And so, and cortisol can be really good for us, but if it's on an ongoing basis, it creates inflammation. And what we know is that inflammation is at the root of disease. And if we're not excreting cortisol, then we're excreting a hormone called DHEA. And that's a regenerative hormone. That's what makes our hair grow. That's what makes our fingernails grow. It gets put in women's face cream to keep us young. It keeps us young. And so we're in one or the other. So what I want to share with you today are simple tools that you can do to interrupt that cortisol, that stress response, to get into that regenerative response. I'm just going to give you a really high level of how a little bit about the brain and why this matters. I don't expect you to remember this. You don't need to know all the terms. It just is going to be grounding in context for what is happening inside our bodies and brain when stress comes at us. So we have evolved over time, and we have our reptilian brain, which is where our fight or flight center is. And then we evolved into having this limbic brain, which is where our emotional centers are, our relationships, our sense of belonging. And then into this higher thinking brain, our neocortex or prefrontal cortex, which is where we have imagination, creativity, intuition, problem-solving ability. And so when a stress comes at us, if we go into this fight or flight response, what is happening is the blood is leaving from this part of our brain, this prefrontal cortex, and going into our amygdala. It is also pulling blood from our vital organs into our extremities. So as an example, if a lion jumps out of a tree, we don't really need a lot of imagination. We just need all of our blood flow to go into our extremities to go and run away from that danger. So that's what our body is biologically doing when we receive a threat. But what's happening is we are living in this chronic state of stress. And we don't have then the access to all our higher thinking centers that we really ultimately want to have. So as leaders, we want to thrive, we want our teams to thrive, and we want our organizations to thrive. We want to be innovative, we want to be solving problems, we want to be adaptable, but that requires the blood flow to be able to be at this front part of our brain. And what has happened is, as a culture, we are living in this chronic stress state. All the news, the media, this pandemic, it is keeping us in this low-grade, chronic, ongoing spot where when we really need to be innovative and be solving problems, we're actually all in this reactive fight or flight state. And so why does this matter? From an organizational perspective, this is a huge problem. 75 to 90% of doctors' visits are stress related. 83% of people struggle from work-related stress. 63% of workers are ready to quit work because of it. 40% of turnover is due to stress. So when you even look at it just from a financial lens, that is huge. If we assume that it's between 120 to 200% cost of somebody's salary to replace them, and they're leaving because of stress, this is having a huge impact on our bottom line. $300 billion a year is what it's a cost to the US economy. And we have this pandemic of stress. It's a word that gets overused. We show up, we say, oh, I'm stressed out. But what are we actually really doing about it? And what does that mean? And what's happening to us? And as John alluded to earlier in the conversation, like this forum is all about wanting to reach our full potential as individuals and as organizations. But we can only really do that if we are able to get out of this fight or flight response. So if you take a look at these graphs, it's really interesting when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's safety, belonging, and then self-actualization. And when you look at those three centers of the brain, the reptilian brain, that is our safety. Our sense of belonging, our relationship is our amygdala, or our limbic brain. And then that higher full potential is access to this prefrontal cortex. And that's what we want for ourselves. And that's what we want for our organizations. Because when we're operating up here, this is where we're innovative. This is where we're creative. This is where we're solving problems. So it's really important to create awareness within ourselves and within our teams and our organization. Where are we at? And what do we need to do to get out of it or move to that next level? So the goal is ultimately for all of us to reach that ultimate potential and be at the topper end of that triangle. So what's keeping us from being able to be there? And how stress reacts in our body is dependent on whether we're resourced or under resourced. It has, when we're under resourced, the way it triggers our brain, we go into that fight or flight response. And over time, that creates anxiety, burnout, depression, overwhelm, chronic overthinking, which is something I'm very, very good at. But if we're resourced, that stress we can use to actually catapult us to that next level. We can use it to energize, to get that project done, to be creative. And so when we're resourced, then that's when we have clarity. That's when we have energy. That's when we have motivation. That's when we have that passion and that fulfillment. So just pay attention. Like, think about those days. Have you felt those days where you're like the gentleman on the right who is standing there and whatever is laying ahead of you is just like this, feels like this big, massive wave that's going to take you over? Or are you resourced and you're like this kid who is like, oh, look at this ocean, look at these waves. I'm taking this on and this is going to be fun. And that resource is where we really want to be. But more often than not, we're living in this under-resourced place. And so if we have lower energy levels, that stress, let's say we rate that stress a 5 out of 10, and we're feeling depleted, that stress is going to take us over. If we're more resourced, then that stress is not going to have such an impact on us. It's the same stress, it's just our ability to deal with it. So I invite you to take a look at this. And if you want to, by all means, drop it in the chat box. But see, where are you on this energy level on the left-hand side of the screen? And this is a place that we have agency, is on this energy level. We can't always control those outside stressors. We can't control what's happening on the news. We can't control the pandemic. We can't control the government necessarily, but we can control ourselves. And if we resource ourselves, then those outer issues are not going to be such a negative influence on us. So I've given you guys a lot. And the question is what can you do about it? So think of yourself like a cell phone battery. And if you woke up in the morning and you went and you looked at your cell phone and it had a charge of 1, maybe 2 bars, you're in the orange or red, what would happen to you? You'd probably have a little panic attack, like, oh my God, how am I going to get through the day without my cell phone? So you're scrambling around, you look for a charger, you borrow a charger, you will go out of your way, you'll go down to a colleague's office to borrow their charger, whatever you need to do to charge your cell phone battery. But how often are you resourcing yourself like you're resourcing your cell phone? How often are you recharging yourself like you are charging your cell phone? And so really, in order to reach those higher potentials, that fulfillment, that innovative, adaptable place of excellence that we all desire, we have to really pay attention to where we are in our inner battery. So I'm going to ask you to do kind of a different exercise, and I invite you to shake. And I know I look really weird, and it is really vulnerable to do this on a webinar. And if you feel like it, stand up and do it. And there's a couple of things that are happening when you shake. So I'm sure that you've heard of how sitting is the new cancer, or sitting is the new cancer. And it's true. We spend so many hours at our computers and our desks and our screens. And it's creating stuck energy in our bodies. So just the simple act, and where stuck energy is where disease begins. So this simple act of moving and shaking our bodies is actually getting the energy going. It is a great tip and trick. In the middle of the day, when you feel like you really need a nap, you do this for a couple of minutes and it will recharge you. And you don't have to necessarily have caffeine to get that impact. But the other thing that this is doing is it's calming our nervous system. It's taking us out of that fight or flight. And it's our body's natural mechanism of counteracting stress. I noticed this the other day with my son. He was putting in an application for school. I could tell he was a little bit worked up about it. And I could see his legs shaking while he was writing out the application. And I thought it was so interesting to watch how his body was supporting him, because that shaking was offsetting the stress that he was experiencing emotionally. And again, this is simple, a little bit silly. It's available to you 24/7, and it costs you nothing. So what else can you do? This work really, as I said before, starts with you, and it's about habits and rituals. And our life is the sum collective of all of our habits. And habits are so important. When we start a habit, it's when we start something new, you know how uncomfortable that is. Like, think about brushing your teeth. You brush your teeth and it's totally an unconscious experience. But if I asked you to do it and put the toothbrush in your opposite hand, all of a sudden it becomes really difficult. And we're hitting our gums and we're making them bleed and we're missing our teeth. And that's because it's a new neural pathway that's being fired. So when we're trying to start something new, we fire a pathway. We're creating a new neural pathway. If we never do it again, that pathway evaporates and disappears. So imagine walking across a park. If you go across the grass just one time and never cross it again, it disappears. But if you continue to walk that same path that across the park the same way every day, it creates a path. And over time, that path gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's our neural pathway. That's how habits work, is the more we do them, the more our neural pathways cement and the more ingrained they become in who we are. And something that initially starts off to be really uncomfortable becomes automatic. So I just really want you to understand that maybe starting some of these things is going to be uncomfortable. It's going to feel a little weird, a bit like the shaking. But over time, it can become automatic. It can become a part of your unconscious, and you won't have to think about it, but it will transform how your body is responding to the stressors that are showing up in your life. So one of the first things I invite my clients to do is, when we think about charging that battery, is figuring out what charges it and what depletes it. So this is a really simple exercise, but equally it's very powerful. And you can do this on a spreadsheet. You can print this off. You can do it any way you want. But you split it into two sides. On the left-hand side, it's what depletes you. And you just label it. And you think about all the things that suck the energy out of you. And use your body as a mechanism too to help you figure this out. So notice the things that you resist, the things that make you contract, the things that make you feel heavy, and the things you want to move away from, and just label them. And even that act of labeling them helps start to turn down the charge around that stress, so it's not impacting your body as much. Then on the other side, make a list of the things that energize you, the things that make you feel open, the things that make you feel tall, the things that make you feel like you're in flow and operating in that higher state. And what the dream is to be moving more towards what's adding energy in our life and getting rid of what's not working for us. Do we need to reframe it and accept it? Do we need to delegate it? Do we just need to take it off our list? Do we just need to turn off that news that's sucking the life out of us every day on TV because it's always full of negativity? You just get to look at it and reframe it, let it go, or give it away. On the other side, where we focus our attention grows. So let's spend more energy working on building capacity and muscles to be practicing the things that energize and doing more of the things that energize us. Another really impactful thing, I'm showing you all my aha moments and little nuggets of transformation. And this one was so powerful for me. This living above the line and below the line. And some of you might have heard of this before. When we're living below the line, that's when we're in blame. That's where we're in denial. We're making excuses. And I would even offer this is when we're in cortisol. This is when we feel contracted. When we're living above the line, this is when we're taking 100% responsibility for our life. This is when we are positive. This is when we're taking ownership of what we need to do. This is when we're in our vision and excellence. Ideally, this is where we're going when we reach those flow states. And this is when we're in that regenerative state. This is when we're releasing those regenerative hormones like DHEA. And the thing is it's not about not living below the line. We all go up and down below the line. The question is how long do we stay there? And when we find ourselves below that line, what do we need to do to get above it? And it's really simple. It's not necessarily very easy. But this is where I started to take agency in my life of accountability and responsibility that, yes, I do have a problem, but how can I take ownership and responsibility about how I choose to perceive it and what I can do to solve it or accept that there's nothing I can do about it. Relax into stress. Kind of counterintuitive. Because when we have a stress response, we contract, right? We get tense, our breath shortens, and we're like this. And we hold that tension in our body all day long. And that tension takes energy. It's draining our battery. So the simple act of paying attention and noticing where you're holding that stress in your body, and do that right now. Just do a quick body scan and see where you're holding it. I hold it in my neck. So when I notice that I'm holding it in my neck, or I breathe into it and relax it, and it's not draining my battery all day long. Equally, when we're facing a problem, if we can, there's that physical relax into the stress. But what would it be like if you took that mindset into a problem or a situation you were facing and took that deep breath and said, I'm just going to relax into this problem. And it is really counterintuitive, but it's really powerful. And that relaxation allows us to get to this part of our brain. I see lower back and shoulders, very common. One cool little nugget I'll share with you is that lower back can mean that we don't feel like, from an emotional perspective, if we have lower back issues, sometimes that can be related to not feeling supported or not supporting ourselves. Somebody with maybe knee issues or hip issues, that's about an inability to take movement forward in life. I hold it in my neck, and that can be rigid. If I'm stiff and rigid, it's that I'm a little bit being rigid in my life and how I see things. So this next one, I don't want you to roll your eyes because I know that you've heard about the breath a million times, but I want to explain to you why. And wisdom traditions have used breath practices for centuries. And our Western culture has not really embraced that as much until a little bit more recently. But what's so amazing is there's some great science now that tells us why the breath is so important. So when we're in a stress response, we have what's called an incoherent heart rate variability. And our in between the beats, our heart rate variability is really jagged and all over the place. And breath can intercept that. So stress has a half-life. Imagine you're driving to work, somebody cuts you off and you get angry. 6.5 hours later, you're in that incoherent state. And what's happening is that incoherent in your heart rate variability sends signals to your brain, creates incoherence in your brain, which signals this cortisol stress response. And over time, it depletes us. It's like having a bucket of water. And if you start your day and you've got your bucket of water, that person cutting you off, that stress is like putting a hole in the bucket. And by the end of the day, you might have 100 holes and you have nothing left in your bucket and you're tired at the end of the day. And over time, you actually get really, really burnt out. So breath can actually interrupt that stress response. And they use this a lot with first responders. And so that exercise I gave you at the beginning, breathing down into your belly, doing a visualization of something that makes you happy, putting a smile on your face, having gratitude, and doing that for a couple minutes will get you into this coherent state. So then it's like putting it, what that does is it's like putting a cork into that hole in the bucket. So somebody cuts you off at work, of course it's going to create, or cuts you off on your way to work, of course it's going to create a stress response, but you don't have to stay in it. So the breath is a really simple way to interrupt it. And some of the tricks and tips that I do, because I'm not very good, I am a shallow breather, and that automatically tells my brain that I'm anxious and stressed. So I have to be creating constant reminders and habits to be able to interrupt that pattern. So I do it through, you can put it on the password of your computer, set reminders on your phone, make a commitment to do it between each phone call or each Zoom call, do it at every red light, put Tic Tacs on your desk and breathe around them. And every time you have a Tic Tac, you force yourself to take a couple minutes and breathe. But this practice over time, if you continue to do it, you can access it faster and easier, and it's going to improve your resiliency. It's going to keep that battery charged, and it's also going to improve your sleep. So if any of you have sleep issues, how you're responding to stress during the day has a direct impact to the quality of sleep that you have at night. So this is one tool that you can use to support how you feel during the night. And Heart Math, I'll have their resource later on one of the screens, but they have if you guys are techies at all and like technology, they have a wearable technology that you can put this on your phone and attach it to yourself. And it will show you when you're in an incoherent or coherent state, and you can practice it. And it will show you when you're coming in or out. And it's really powerful and fun. I started using it a lot, but as I got better at it, I didn't really need it. But some people really like that automatic feedback and those reminders. So it's worth taking a look at if this interests you. Whew. I'm going to shake it off a little bit. I'm giving you guys a lot of information. Acknowledgement. So simple. But not easy. And this is a lot like gratitude. It is it does change how our brain works, where the blood is flowing, and the chemistry and the hormones that are being released in our body. And gratitude I see as something as being something outside of you. I'm thankful for my family, my wife, my kids, my career. But how often do we acknowledge ourselves? So it's holding up that mirror, taking a look, and being grateful for who we are. And I ask clients to write down 75 things I can acknowledge, that 75 things they can acknowledge themselves for. And that can be a really difficult exercise. I personally do it with my gratitude exercise. I do it every night before I go to bed, and I write things, or I don't write. I don't particularly am not drawn to a journal, so I do it mentally, but some people love journaling. But I acknowledge myself for 5 things. I'm grateful for 5 things. And it really changes the lens of how I see that world, and makes me move from that victim to that victor mindset, and seeing what I am doing versus what I'm not doing. It's really powerful and really simple. And I see this having a great, with high achievers. Imagine a rainbow and a pot of gold. And we are always after that pot of gold, and we want to be getting to that next level. But every time we get to that one level, that pot of gold gets just a little bit further away. And every step closer we get, the further, so the pot of gold moves. And acknowledgement, when we set those goals for ourselves and we've achieved it, we just move on to the next one and the next thing that we want to accomplish. Acknowledgement brings us into the present moment. It gives us an opportunity to see what we have achieved, and increases our fulfillment, increases our self-esteem. It increases our confidence. And I have found this to be a really powerful tool to take to teams. And as Oprah said, she found that there are 3 commonalities between every person who walked off their stage, across her stage, whether it was a criminal, whether it was a politician, a movie star, it didn't matter. There were 3 things. Do you see me? Do you hear me? And what I say, does it matter to you? And acknowledgement makes you feel seen. It makes you feel heard. It supports that safety mechanism that we're so hungry for. And so I invite you to go around with your team, and as a leader, you acknowledge each person in the room for one thing, and acknowledge, and then acknowledge yourself, and then go on to the next person, and the next person does the same thing. And it will change the dynamic of the group, and people will feel valued, and people will feel seen. And then what that team is able to do together is amplified. It costs nothing. It's available to you for 24/7, and it only works if you practice it. This one's really simple and kind of silly, but very real. And that is smiling. The simple act of smiling, that change in the body changes the chemistry in our brain. Kids smile 400 times a day. Adults only smile 28 times a day. So you see me driving around, and I'm forcing and practicing my smile so I can access it easier. Equally, when I smile, and as John talked about, this ripple effect, this cascading effect, your smile has a cascading ripple effect on all the people around you. And I'm just going to quickly go into this last one so we can go into questions. This is another technology that has been amazing for me, and it's called Brain Tap. And you can go to their website and download the app. And this app has 5 things. Their technology has 5 things going for it. And you do not need to buy this headset. You can, it's quite expensive, but you don't need that to get started. I just use a regular headset. But it has 5 things. It has isochronic tones and binaural beats. and they're playing in the background. And what they're doing is changing the frequency of your brain to help get into those relaxation states. And then they've layered in neuro-linguistic programming and visualization. So as you get into those relaxation states, it's also reprogramming your subconscious to a more positive, generative way of thinking. And then the final piece they have is the light therapy, which amplifies everything. But it's really easy to do with just a regular headset, and you can download the app and play with it. But for me, somebody who is so sensitive and living on that tightrope, this has been transformational for me. So I can put that headset on and go from a place where I can't even figure out how to log on or change a password on my computer to doing 10 to 20 minutes of this, feeling like I've had 8 hours of sleep. So it's really simple. You can do it at home. You can do it before you go to bed. You can do it sitting at your desk or on a break, and it will regenerate your brain. So we can go into, here are some of the resources. There's the BrainTap website. There's the HeartMath website. I can go into tapping later on if anybody's interested into it, because that's another really simple, effective tool. But I want to leave some space for questions. And one last quick thing that I'll put in there is iristech.co. And for those of you who are really sensitive to screens, you can download it in about 30 seconds. It works on your desktop or your laptop. It does not work on iPads or iPhones. And what it does is it reduces the blue light. And for somebody who's highly sensitive to light, I'm really in tune with how much that drains me. And it drains all of us. I just feel it faster. And so downloading this app, and I put it on reading, it softens my entire computer screen and increases my longevity on a computer, and equally decreases the stress that it's had on me all day. So I just want to leave you guys with this idea that I know all of us want to make a positive difference in our own lives, with our families, with our teams, with our organizations. And it's not always about the big things. It's these little things. And if we pay attention to these little things, then we can do amazing things together. So thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to be here with you. Please feel free to ask me any questions. I get really geeked up about this stuff, and I have so many other things I could share. But hopefully there's some nuggets of goodness that you can walk away with today that are going to make a difference in your life.
So we have a request from Rick Franzi, who I know you've been taking that conscious capitalism class with, certification with, and he is asking you to share a little bit about the energy work that you've experienced using, and in relationship to what we're talking about today.
Okay, that is a big question.
That's why I said a little bit.
I am a big advocate of energy work because in my healing journey, it's really the energy work that has transformed me. And that's where I've noticed the difference in my life. So we have these energetic fields and we can't see them. My kids used to be able to see them. Some people can feel them. For me, no matter how much I practice and how much I try, I've never been able to do that, but I know it's possible. And so our heart has an electromagnetic field of about 12 feet. So think about when you walk into a room and you can feel the tension, but you haven't talked to anybody, you haven't seen anyone, seen any faces, but you can just feel it. That is your heart picking up on the frequency of what's going on in the room. Our emotions have a frequency, and we can measure those up to with 98% accuracy. So the lower emotions, that shame and guilt, are really dense, And higher, I can add a slide to this later on in the slide deck. And the higher emotions, joy and gratitude, are quite expansive. And that's when we feel open, and that's when we're in the flow. And that's when things are easier, when we're in the guilt, the shame, the fear, the resentment. Those actually are contracted frequencies that make us dense, and it's harder for us to move. And that's where we find ourselves stuck in life. And so I've taken on a lot of different energy practices. I do Qigong, cranial sacral, acupuncture, Reiki, even music. It's all frequency. So the brain tap that I gave you, that idea that's dealing with frequencies in the body, music has a frequency. So we can have music that brings us great joy. Equally, music can play frequencies that contract us and make us feel small. And energy work is just frequency medicine. So it's with color, it's with sound, it's with light, it's with thoughts, it's with feelings. Does that answer your question, Rick? Maybe not.
That's a good, I'll wait for, he says yes, of course.
Okay.
So, you talked about how, I loved what you said, to reach our full potential, we must get out of the stress response, right? And I'm wondering, you gave us some I don't know, ways to remind ourselves to kind of counterbalance. Simple things like maybe notes or screensavers or whatever. What about though, what's your suggestion around when we're in a under-resourced state? How do we notice that? Because I tell you, sometimes I struggle with that. I'm not in a good place, and I'm not even aware of it. So how do we bring our awareness to, this isn't really working? Yeah.
Well, I think it is awareness. It's practices. It's not in that moment, John. We can do things, but it's equally, what are you doing up into that moment to create awareness so that when you are there, you can pick it out. Mm-hmm. So it's the opportunity to listen to our bodies. We have not really culturally been conditioned to listen to our bodies, no pain, no gain, push through, keep ignoring it until we finally hit that wall, that crisis that we can't go anymore. So it's these subtle nuances to pay attention to. And what do we do when we're in that under-resourced state and we have something really real to face? And I think that's where something like breath is really important, because rather, if we take that moment and we take that pause and we take that breath, that's where we have a choice point. And we have a choice point in how we react. And we can, if we go into our instantaneous subconscious reactive state, chances are we're either going to blow up at somebody, or if you're like me, you retract and you run away and you hide. If we can practice that pause and say, what is the best option available to me in this moment, and take a deep breath, then we have a choice point.
Yeah. I love all of the sharing around breath. I find that for myself, when I'm in that under-resourced, it's oftentimes because I'm consumed with something from yesterday or something that's not yet happened. And when I do remember to stop, take that breath, whether it's a shake off or whatever, what I find is when I do that scan that you were inviting us to do, is that there is stuff that is kind of like obviously kind of blocking and crimping, if you will. And just that little pause and taking that breath seems to really begin to open things back up. and allow me to be much more present. So I think, from my own experience, it's a very, very powerful suggestion there. All right, let's see. We've got Rick asking, what could you recommend to a leader for them to learn to become more intuitive or in tune with the stress-related state of their employees? How do they become more sensitive to others' emotional states?
I'm going to take a breath because, again, Rick, great question. We could have like a whole nother 40-minute session on that. So intuition is a practice. We all have it. We've got our left side and our right side of our brain. When we are in a chronic stress place, and I know this because my body hasn't been able to get out of it because the way the circuitry was fried during my concussion, accessing that intuition is harder. So as we slow down and take that breath and that moment, have you ever, for me, one of the most generative, creative, intuitive places that I have are on my dog walks. That's where some of my best work gets done, or in the shower. And that's when we're coming out of that relaxed, that stress state, more into that relaxed state. And that's where you can access the intuition, because the blood will flow to your left and right side of the brain. So it will go to both centers, but equally it's a practice. And simple things of even just noticing, again, going back to, I could give you a whole list. And if anybody wants to talk about this later on, I can, because I'm practicing my intuition and learning to trust it in those hits. But it's that feeling in your body. It's not that thinking. It's not that processing piece. It's instantaneous. And so paying attention to when that happens and go, oh, that was my intuition. Or, oh, I have a feeling in my gut that's making me, I don't want to do that. Listen to it. That's practicing your intuition. In terms of answering the second part around understanding the state of your employees, I think that's where conversation is really important. What's working for you? What's not working for you? Because we will all have different expressions of it. So it's learning to be in conversation and getting to know that person is to, oh, I can see that person clamping down in the meeting and they're not saying anything. And that is a response to them being in that is their stress response. And then you see somebody else who might have like a really sharp response and might be kind of edgy and aggravated. And so you'll notice that for them, their response to stress is that fight response, that go for, protect, territorial self. So it's learning to listen to each person individually. And the more that you put awareness at that, the easier it's going to become.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. You've given us not only a good foundation for understanding the influence of stress, but ways to reframe it, to approach it differently, and to kind of begin, really rejuvenating ourselves, practicing that regeneration. And this is really a powerful mechanism for returning to resourcefulness at any given moment. So we really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Rick. And thank you all for that we're here today. And I hope you guys have nuggets of inspiration peppering you all day long.
So we will be putting this recording on Team Vibe along with Jessica's PowerPoint and some additional materials, as well as resources that she's generously supplying. And thank you. You're, of course, welcome to reach out to Jessica to keep the conversation going between you and her. Thank you. all have a wonderful day, and we'll see you at the next Expert Insight on April 9th. Thank you.
Thank you.